So welcome back to Worth the Effort Woodworking. This is our second live stream to go along with the Turning Basics class series. The second class was more of the accessories that go along with the lathe. So we were going to talk about those. But for the first 5 minutes or so, as people are rolling in, I thought we would just chat a little bit. And if you've watched other live streams, there seems to be a standard format. I will say this, in that turning video, I turned this mallet, and basically it's straight off the tool. It even has that crack that I talked about in the video. Roughing, no sanding, no nothing. We're going to give this away at the end of the stream so that you can actually judge your own work against mine. Say, hey, he's got tear out because he hasn't done any sanding and he was using the roughing gouge on this side. Hey, I can see tool mark lines right here because he was using the roughing gouge, but it's a lot smoother here. Well, you can judge it and say, hey, my work is just as good as his if you win this. I'm also going to give away the honey dipper we did right there. Once again, straight off the tool, no finishes, no nothing. Is there any way we can turn the volume down on yours? We're getting an echo. And we'll give these two away at the end of the stream, just randomly to somebody that's in the stream. Okay. This week in the shop, what happened was, well, this is 2 weeks away from that live stream, mainly because we're in Texas and we all know what's happened in Texas. The power was going on and off. We were very, very lucky here. No pipes bursting. We had a boil water notice, but the water was never shut off. No, nothing like that. The power did cut out every now and then, but we were pretty steady. It would be out for like 4 or 5 hours, and it'd be on for 4 or 5 hours that first day. And then it was like it was off for an hour and a half and on for 3. Off for an hour and a half. And in San Marcos, we are on our own little power company, so they were really pretty good for us. It did frustrate me though, because I couldn't come out to the shop and just do stuff, and it was cold in the shop. Last week was kind of a waste for me here. This week, because of the stores are slowly starting to open up, I started to get some of my old toy stores contacting me about getting tops. So I'm getting into that pattern of turning 20 to 30 tops a day. I just fill up these jars and send them 100 at a time. We have about a dozen stores I had about 18 stores. I think 7 of them are shut down for good, so they're never coming back. But the other ones are slowly stocking up, and they're contacting me. So I just got to get the inventory back up. So a lot of my mornings or late in the evening, a lot of times I'll put a movie on the iPad and just turn tops for a few hours in the evenings. That's what I've been doing. We have about 200 right now so far. And as far as woodworking, that's really all I've done. Right, video-wise, I'm working on a video on super tuning my jointer and super tuning my bandsaw, because since the move, we haven't done very many big projects, and I'm sure that they have gone out of whack in the move. So I've got to do the work anyway, so we will turn them up. That way I can use those 2 tools to make a lathe stand. That will not be a video in the Turning Basics series, because I figured most new wood turners would buy their stand or have a stand would come with a used one. I just want to get this at the right height, because if you understand, it is a good 6 inches too high for me right now. So I need a new stand, and I'm going to do a pretty cool trestle design that I've done in the past, but we're going to modify it a little bit. So those 3 videos, Thursday will be a jointer video, Tuesday will be a table saw video, next Thursday will be a lathe stand video, and then I'm going to film 6 of these Turning Basic classes and get them at least in the can and release them every Thursday after that. And we'll do a live stream as a follow-up. So that's kind of what's been going on in the shop. Strangely, I've been turning tops very late in the evening. A couple times we'll pass 1 o'clock just watching movies and stuff like that. And then I'm the first one in the shop the next day. And I have been noticing, and Dad might have noticed this too, but when you come in, somebody's been using the shop and not sweeping up, because you'll see different kinds of species of shavings out there. My camera setup will be moved over there. It's almost as if some unknown turner's coming in the middle of the night and making stuff. We'll have to investigate a little bit more on that one, but I would hate for somebody to be coming out here and just showing off on the lathe and filming them doing fancy stuff and just putting up a video on YouTube so that people can watch them and voyeuristically follow along and learn absolutely nothing. I mean, those kind of people are it's just a money grab for those guys looking for view count, doing fancy show-off turning. Absolutely no value to a channel like this. So we'll investigate that a little bit more, but you know, if I learn anything else about this some unknown wood turner, I'll tell you about it.
Lou says else.
What?
Lou says that they're else.
Probably. I don't know. Somebody's unknown out there.
No, it's not Dad.
It ain't Dad. He doesn't use the one-way right now. He's got the big robust. You want to talk about anything you've been doing?
Yes.
Well,
I have been rearranging my tools. I put all my gouges up with new holders on the wall, but didn't really like what I was doing. So later on, I can show you what I was doing and what I changed it to, and I really like it much better. So
you want to show them now?
we can show them right now. I'll walk you over.
We're going mobile. We're going mobile.
This is what I had put together to put my tools up. It just horizontal. I thought that would be an easy way to work, and I duplicated it on by my lathe, but it wasn't functioning well. So I've changed it. I took some old wire shelving and turned it upside down, and with some PVC pipe, and angled it a little bit, so it's worked out pretty well. This is not really my idea, but I saw it on YouTube. Someone did it in a background, and it looked pretty good. So, and Sean's suggestion of putting half of a 2x4 behind it and getting it an angle means I can layer them. It worked out real well.
He's still going to have sawdust behind those things to clean out. So.
And I've been making peg people.
Okay, so that's what's been going on in the shop. I used to, when I was doing those woodworking tips videos, I'd kind of recommend somebody at the end of it. I thought I'd just tell you, here's a couple videos I've seen that piqued my interest. There's a young lady that has moved back up to the States with her husband. I don't know why they relocate so much, but she's kind of assembled a nice little tool of a bunch of older used equipment. She started producing product again, and her video this last week was a very nicely put together chair. If you look her up, it's Honest Work Designs. She did a low back stool. The design is kind of beginnerish, but the method she used for assembling it was really, really solid, and I think it put her skill level. She stretched herself, which I thought was pretty cool. Bob Rzansky, he's a legend in the blogging style, and he's written for a lot of magazines in the hand tool world, and very rarely does he upload a video, and he put one up on how to add taper to your woodworking projects with hand tools. He's always worth catching out. It's a little dry sometimes, but the knowledge there is unbelievable. And then Laura Kampf, she did this copper finish on steel, and normally it's like an anodizing process when you plate copper onto steel, but she did it with a chemical wash, with little acid and stuff like that. Really, really cool design, and I could really see that if you did like a copper, a steel or other metal inlay to be able to do that copper finish. Worth checking out. Very short video. And then the Wood Whisperer came out with a new video on making a blanket stand. And the reason why I mentioned that one is because he used copper dowels along his, and he did a process where he tarnished it to get different colors on it. So I could see using Laura's finishing technique to apply a copper to a metal you put into a wood turning, or I'm actually thinking about it for a teardrop trailer I'm going to be building, and then using Mark's tarnishing technique to vary the level of tarnishing it to get different colors on the copper to really make either like a camo pattern or even an intarsia pattern where you paint it on at different layers, and then the continued added layers makes it darker in some spots and lighter in the other, and then you can sand it a little way to bring out the real copper look to it. I just thought combining those two ideas would be kind of cool in turning. You seen any videos you want to talk about? No,
I'm not. You got this guy, and this guy gave you some fan. D family and D Lee.
Oh, thank you, B family. Very much appreciated. You too, D Lee. Thanks a lot. That helps out. Okay, if you want to ask me a question, it would really help me out if you would put like 3 or 4 question marks in front of what you say. Other than that, I'm just kind of assuming y'all are chatting back and forth to each other. As always, I'd like to put a little bit of a preference to my patrons to make sure I get their questions answered first. Dad is recording questions from your comments, so I will get to those in a second and we'll intermix them. My first question, well, I actually have 2 people that were talking about handles. Mr. Potter asked me if I ever reuse handles. I have one right here that came off of an old tool, and the only reason it came off of an old tool is because the steel fell out. It wasn't built right from the get-go. And I don't want to tell you what company this is. Luckily, I had worn off their logo, but brass and black on oak handles, if you go out there, you'll probably know who it is. But the reason why you don't reuse your wood handles is because if you can get it to this point, that's not a good handle. It is loosened up somehow. You basically should have to destroy the tool to get the steel out. Otherwise, you haven't made it right. And I have a couple of videos out there on making handles. And one of the projects, we will do a handle making technique where we're actually just going to use a drill bit instead of steel. No, drill bit steel. You get the idea. So I'll show you the techniques in this series. But once this thing goes together with no adhesive whatsoever, it should never come out. So that was one of the handles questions. And then I had one person asking, how hard do I tighten the tailstock? I'm grabbing a piece of wood right now, off camera. Okay, so we have the drive and the live. Normally on the drive side, I will make sure that these pieces, the spurs that grip it, are driven into this block a little bit. There's a controversial comment that was left in the comments that we'll discuss a little bit later on about that. But in order to do that, when you have to extend this out, and this is actually, the live center is actually going to go into the wood first as that centerpiece sinks in. Oh, yeah, this is the one that you have to batch out. It does have this particular lathe does have a release. It's just this particular one I'm told it comes with a little plastic red thing that goes in there, but mine didn't. So judge that what you will. Well, that spur right there goes in first, then this will touch, at which point you now come over to your drive side and start watching until those teeth bite in. After that, it's pretty much set and you can turn it on and go for it. If you're ever turning and the blank slips, I will retighten it over here. And I am constantly on Greenwood retightening this because the drive spur is just normal torque of the vibration of the wood. As you turn it, it will slowly drive into this piece a little bit, so it loosens up the whole piece, so you have to retighten this end to squeeze it more. So how hard do you do it? I hate to say this. Get the the alignment pins pushed in and make sure whatever's gripping on this side grips, and then you should be okay. It is a bit of a feel with different species. The harder the wood, the less really pressure you have to put on the back end. The softer the wood, you kind of drive it in a little bit more. And that was from Mr. Straight. Mr. Clegg asked me, my opinion, since we were talking about accessories in the last video, was on the Robert Sorby Pro Edge sharpening system. And what that is, it's kind of a belt sander where the belt comes up and down and you have a platform right here so that you can put your tools on there. My opinion is it is dramatically overpriced. It's a belt sander. It has more torque in it, so it's not going to slow down. It doesn't go as fast. They do have diamond belts nowadays that you can order that are kind of pricey, just like diamond wheels on a grinder arm. But the key thing is it creates a flat bevel, like that. So if you hone your tools like I do, it means that anytime you hone it, you have to remove all of that material. Whereas if you have a little bit of a curve, like an 8 or a 12-inch disc right there, all you have to do is remove the metal on the back side and the edge, and you can kind of ride it and just kiss that edge ever so slightly. And you get a straight line between those 2 points because you get a little flat on here and a little flat on there. Can y'all see that? And that is the same on bowl gouges and all that kind of stuff. That little slightest of curves makes it much easier to hone your work. And does that slight curve matter? No, because we're making things round. We're dealing with curves anyways. A slight curve on something like a hand plane or a carving chisel, having a flat bevel in those situations does have advantages in certain situations, but really not that big a deal. So that Robert Sorby Pro Edge, I know lots of people say they use it all the time. I don't know any production wood turners that do. That might tell you something. Me personally, I just looked at the price tag that first time and thought about what it was doing and said, it's not for me. Okay. Mr. Wilson asked me to explain my sanding pad. If you go to symposium and stuff like that, you'll see these sandpaper vendors. That's where a lot of people buy a year's worth of sandpaper. And they just have these in tubs of all different shapes. I think Dad has one where it's got a little 2-inch pad on this side, 3-inch, and a lot of us sanders buy these 3-inch discs like there. I don't do as much power sanding as Dad does, and I use this thing quite a bit. And basically what I have is coarse, not so coarse, medium, and fine, and that's all the sanding I do, and I just like it. I like the fact that it's got a little bit of sponge in there, so I can press it down on flats and like bowls, and it's not just sanding on one point, but sanding all this point. Or I could put not as much pressure and only sand on one part of these discs, and I'm constantly rotating the disc out there. I will say this, in my mind, I have an idea of a way to improve these. I am talking with some people about getting some leather and doing it. My hard part is attaching the Velcro to the leather, really thick leather, so it's going to be soft and stuff like that. I don't know how to adhese it yet without stitching it on, because you can't use adhesive on that because adhesive just kind of melts because of the heat. These are actually bonded to that foam, so it's different. But you can find, just look for sanding pads for 3/8 discs, and there are places out there. It's called a sanding pad. And this is one of the #1 comments I get in all my videos. Where did you get that? All that kind of stuff. It's a turning specific tool. You're not gonna find it at Home Depot. Probably in a catalog, a turner's catalog, or a turning supply website, or any site that sells the sandpaper, because they want you to use up their sandpaper. Okay. And I had a Mr. Larson and somebody that commented on Patreon literally right before I started this one, so I forgot their name. He was asking, Mr. Larson was asking about the hardness of steel, because he has the option of buying some steel, some gouges. One of them is RC52, the other is one of them is RC58, the other is RC62. That RC scale, I forget, I think it's Rockford, something like that. I don't know the term, but that's basically how much pressure it takes to push a little BB into the material. Basically, the harder the steel, the longer it's going to hold an edge. The downside is it will take more effort to get that edge. But remember me talking about the hollow grind and only having to remove a little bit of the 2 points? That's the advantage there. Softer steel is much easier to sharpen. It's not going to hold its edge as long. But that's kind of a oversimplification, because a softer steel, it will gradually lose its edge. So you'll get a soft curve down there, and it's not going to serrate. If you get a steel that's too hard, it actually doesn't come out. It serrates. It cracks off instead of grinding down. And you can actually have a steel that is too hard for diamond stones or friable disc, and you'll never really get as sharp as you can get with a softer steel, because the edge fractures instead of polishing down. That's why most of the higher end tools are like right above RC 60 to mid 60s, because that's just kind of a sweet spot for edge retention and ease of sharpening. Anything in the RC50 range for turning, I think is too soft personally. But it's a judgment call. Generally, the harder it is, it's going to be more expensive. Anything in the RC70 range, I think, is way too hard. Then the other gentleman had a comment left in the comment section. He was asking, how do you gauge the quality of steel when you're on the used market? And I have a very snarky response to that. Don't buy steel used. Steel technology has come so far in the past 20 years. You know, you might have baby boomers or your great-grandfather that's liquidating all his tools, and he has a lot of high carbon steel. You can tell it's high carbon because you put it on the grinder and you get lots of sparks coming off of it. High-speed steel doesn't spark as much, but it's not going to hold its edges long. And grinding high carbon steel and lower quality high speed steels, you know, you have to worry about the temper of the steel. If it gets too hot when you're grinding it, it's going to lose its temper. It's not going to hold its edges well, and bad things will happen, or frustrating things will happen. Whereas you get in these higher quality steels, some of them, you can just get them as hot as you physically can on the type of grinders we use, and not to worry about losing its temper, even past it changing colors. This is not like hand tools and stuff like that, where temperature is critical. Granted, take that with a grain of salt. So my snarky opinion is, don't buy used tools. Go ahead and get good quality steel, but don't waste your money buying a handle. Make your own handles. That's where you can save your money, is on the handles. Get good steel. Now, Dad has two gouges over here, and here's a really good example. Are they sitting over there?
Yeah, I'll get them.
So, you know, if I... Just, you can move it. Don't worry about it. For example, this is a Thompson skew. I want to say this is $60 to $80. Not cheap at all. This is a lifetime investment for me. Whereas this spindle gouge right here, you know, I'll go through one of these every year, every other year. But you know, Dad, he's just like me. He grinds on his bowl gouges, and he bought this one how many years ago?
10.
10 years ago. And he bought
it 2 years ago.
2 years
the same
ago.
one.
So it's the same model of steel. He just replaced it because it got so short that it was hard.
And it was probably about this long when I bought it.
So 2 years of that.
And this is, yeah.
You spend $100 on that one. I want you to imagine how much turning he did in that much of steel. How much sandpaper would it have taken to get that far? That's at least $6,000 worth of sandpaper if all you were doing is sanding. Steel is cheap in comparison to everything else. Just get good steel. And the difference being, I had a Robert Sorby before I went to the Thompson steel, which Thompson's, it's a more expensive steel. But I would go through a Robert Sorby one of these much, much sooner. So it turned out to be economically viable for me to spend more in the beginning and just have it last me longer. So the snarky response to that is don't buy used steel gouges. And if you do want to do it, go to your wood turning club, because there will always be turners like me that have upgraded their steel and they have their older stuff that they maybe got when they were brand new, and it's probably, I don't want to say it's probably Chinese import stuff that was really cheap to buy. They bought a set and they got a bunch of stuff, and then they figured out what they want to do and they bought the right stuff. So you can probably get, well, we've given away gouges at our turning events, and I bet there are a lot of other turners that are the same way. Shoot, you saw how many gouges Dad has. He doesn't need all those. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
You don't need all those gouges on the wall. Why do you keep them?
I'm a tool junkie.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So those are all my Patreon questions. Any questions on?
Yeah. Brookman was nice to you.
Oh, thank you, Greg.
Misfit 4 was the size and grinding profile of a negative Rex scraper, and I would go get a couple of mine and show you. And the other question was, what's the proper height for your leg?
I answer the proper height thing. The general rule of thumb is you want the center in between centers to be at your elbow level. Now, if you're doing a lot of miniature work, it would make sense to be a little bit higher so you can come over here. If you're doing big stuff, it could be probably a little bit lower because you're standing back. But the thing is, if you go higher or lower than your angle, look at how I'm holding the tool. A lot of times I have the tool resting back here, so the more contact you have with the tool, the better control you have. If it is too high, all of a sudden now I would have to touch the workpiece on the top, and all that force is coming back towards me. If I had the tool rest too low, I'm actually having to drop my shoulder to get it so it would contact at that midpoint. So the tool rest height dictates where you're going to be touching that tool in a comfortable position. If it's too high, you end up getting large trapezoids. If it's too low, you're kind of working on your back as you're hunkering down. So start out with it at your elbow height or a little bit higher, because it's easy to lower a stand because you can always remove wood, but it's harder to add wood. And then just kind of work it until you feel comfortable. I would say me and Dad are roughly the same height. He has shrunk down to my height over these past few years, and he likes his tool, lathe a little bit higher than I like mine. So
Negative rate scrapers. If you can see mine is like a 40 on this side and like a 70 on this side. There. It's in focus. Yeah, and that's what and I just leave it that one way, and don't change. It works fine for me, and I really like using negative scrapers.
Now, Dad does different angles on both sides. I'm lazy. I have my grinder set to 40 degrees. I just do them both at 40 degrees and I don't worry about it.
John Shop was angled for preferred angle for bowl gouge, and that all the other people do that.
Okay, John, you're asking what's the preferred angle for a bowl gouge? So we have a big bowl gouge right here. And what we're talking about is the angle right there. But what you are probably thinking when you're asking that is the angle over here. Because a lot of times those are not the same thing. It just depends upon how you sharpen it. A lot of times if you're using a jig where you attach it up like that Wolverine setup I talked about over there, as you rotate it around, this side is not going to be the same angle as the front. It'll be totally different. So there are a lot of people that like the 40-40 grind. And what that is you set your platform at 40 degrees, and because that platform is constant, you can rotate it around and control it and get it 40 degrees all the way around. Some people don't like that. So when you say what's the right angle, hey, it kind of depends upon your comfort level of what you enjoy working with, which is why, play around, try different angles. 40 degrees is always going to be a good, solid go-to home base. But if you're using the Wolverine setup, you're never going to be able to get that consistent angle all the way around on all of the tools. Just the nature of the physics of having it turn off angle at a little bit more complex angle. Do you have any other opinion on that?
Charles McBride asks, can I replace the handle if it's too short? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just destroy the handle that's on it and put a new one on. Which brings me to...
and then Chris, I cannot pronounce your last name, Noyoco something, asks, is there any situation, he was describing a situation where on bowl turning that he thought he could use his spindle roughing gouge? The answer is no, definitely no, never no.
Yeah,
no.
you can do it.
If you did, you're asking for trouble.
Spindle roughing gouge? Yeah, no.
You don't want to do it because you're just asking for trouble.
I thought you said spindle gouge. Yeah.
Spindle roughing gouge.
A spindle roughing gouge? No.
No, never.
No. Don't risk it. Oh, FYI, when we unboxed this, I complained about this hatch being already cracked. Jet sent me a new one under warranty, and it came within 3 days of me calling about it, so that's pretty good. Disappointing it's cracked up the get-go. Kind of disappointing this is plastic instead of steel, but they replaced it, no questions asked. The follow-up question to handles I got in the comments section of the YouTube video on the lathe accessories was options for buying handles. Now, if you're going to spend money on the handle, you can get some really wild custom ones. Here's one I always like, Thompson. This is what he sells. It's kind of an octagon, but not quite, because these are round and then it's flat, round, flat. But it has a nice feel to it, but what makes his so cool is you can change the weights of it. This one right here, you can undo this and you can put lead shot all the way through here. You can put lead shot in it, then put some baffling, and then put more lead shot back here to change the vibration frequency of it. This one particular one is the only Thompson handle I have. Dad let me borrow this particular one because it's a monster-sized bowl gouge that he didn't particularly like. I love it because when I'm doing a lot of roughing work, I have bad carpal tunnel. It doesn't make my hands go numb because of the vibration dampening of that one. I like this so much. I have a video on making a Wicked tool handle. I added that dampening factor to a wood one. Now this handle is half the weight of that one, but I have, this is hollow where I put BBs on the back to kind of put weight back here, and the wood actually flexes a little bit. So even though this is lighter, it has a different vibration characteristic. I only use this one for hollowing. It's a spindle gouge, not a bowl gouge, and I use it for in-grain hollowing. That's one advantage of buying, you know, these metal ones. Other people really like the fact that they can buy one handle and use a bunch of different heads. And maybe it's just because I know the crowd that does a lot of demonstrations. They will load up their suitcases with, you know, a dozen different kinds of blades, but only one handle, and they're just constantly swapping out those during the live demonstration so that they don't have to take as much on the airplane. And I think Stuart Batty makes one setup where it's kind of a collet design. But if you get them, going back to Thompson's, this is one of Dad's. It's a very short one, but when you get these short ones, there's no space for adding those weights. And you can get very small sizes on this one. I'm tempted to make a whole set, of spindle roughing gouge, a skew, and a spindle gouge dedicated just to my tops with these super short handles. Because if you're doing tiny stuff, it's nice to be able to move in front of yourself. Whereas if you have a more traditional size handle, like this one right here, which I just have brass on the back, it's not loaded, you end up having to be ambidextrous because you'll be turning this way and then I'll turn this way. And I'll do that one because I cannot come in front of me because I'm just too fat. Well, you know, your spine and rib cage is also there, but there's a lot of other stuff there too. So, you know, wood turning is somewhat of an ambidextrous kind of hobby because of this action. But if you have a very short handle and you're doing small stuff, well, you can come in front of yourself. Other styles of handles, one way makes one, and it's like, I don't know what this material is. Maybe we can see that right there. But you can see it has the little grub screws on both ends. And they make gouges where they'll have a cutting edge on both sides. So you can actually sharpen this both sides and then swap it out with just grub screws, quick. You can actually have another one sitting inside here. So you can have one handle holding 3 different gouges at the same time if you wanted to. This is Dad's, and I use this in hollowing just because it's nice and long and I can put it on another tool and use it as kind of a cheater bar. He also showed me this kind, which I didn't even know he had an Easy Wood tools at all. But he's got some carbide tools, which I might try out someday. But it's kind of a foam handle. And I guess on a cold day that's kind of nice, and I guess foam would add some vibration dampening. But if you want that kind of action, you can always go to a whatever that hockey stick wrap. And I know a lot of people will do that one on metal ones because metal can be somewhat slippery sometimes. So if you're buying handles, you got a lot of options out there. Most of the advantages comes from weight, and you don't have to turn it, but convenience, I guess. Okay, do we have any other questions from the chat?
No.
Okay, that is all the comments I had from Patreon. We're about 30 minutes in. Some of the comments from, I don't know if y'all read the comments on the YouTube video, but despite that rant in that video about the difference between blunt force trauma and what that kind of stuff, and I told you in every single turning video, you're gonna have people making comments. Just go browse them. They're there. You know, teeth went flying. My helmet marked. My jaw was marked off over there. All the, yeah, it always shows up. Just don't get in the line of fire. You'll be okay. I was talking about accessories, and I recommended the Wolverine grinding sharpening system because of its stability. It's fairly inexpensive for what you're getting. I mean, really pretty high quality. I like it, and most of the other pro turners have actually own it and use it now, or have owned it and maybe they've gone to something like Tormek for some stuff, but they keep it around for other stuff. But everyone seems to use them. But an alternative out there is, a lot of people were referencing the Kodiak system. I was not familiar with it, and my only experience with that is looking at it on a computer screen. It looked to me like it was a lot of folded steel or bent steel and not extruded stuff. Somewhat of a knockoff of the Wolverine setup, with the exception that it gave you a platform that combined those two sides that clamp on the bars. The Wolverine setup tells you need to raise up the grinder 3/4 of an inch, and it looked like that system just provided a platform that raised it up for you. Most of us just stick our grinders on a piece of plywood. So the only thing I can look at is it looked like it did the same exact thing as the Wolverine, but it was about twice as much money. And it was made out of plate steel instead of just extrusions. Ganaso Vajarin TV Kaura Tiva from Sri Lanka made a comment that he is seeking wood turning machinery for a reasonable price. Only thing I can tell you is, aren't we all? But asking a guy in Texas, if you're in Sri Lanka, about getting reasonable prices, I suggest you ask your local people. There was a pretty controversial comment that some people, this was referencing the first class when I was telling you about squeezing in between these 2 points. And I'll back up so you can see what I'm talking about. They were saying you should always take your drive spur, the one that goes in the headstock, put it on your piece, and hit it with a hammer in order to preserve your bearings, okay? Because if you're squeezing this way, they're saying the bearings aren't designed to go that. They're just designed to go round. The only flaw I see in that thing, I've heard that before, it's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of like somebody telling you to always store your hand planes on their side. That was probably a high school teacher taught that at the very beginning because kids weren't tightening it up enough to begin with. They tell people never store your planes this way because it dulls them fast. Well, I'm sitting here thinking, yes, you hammer it down, it makes a little indentation, then you put it on your lathe, then what do? You tighten it up. So there's still going to be these exact same amount of pressure going this way on those bearings. And what's worse is when you're running it, they're spinning and pushing that pressure down. When you're just pressing it down, they're not spinning. So it seems to me it's damned if you do, damned if you don't on the bearing pressure. The one advantage I do like about hammering it first is when you have really soft grain wood, sometimes it will compress that fibers, shock it a little bit, and it ends up not pressing as far in. But the pressure on those bearings are going to be the same. Me thinking about it, I have no scientific backing on that one, but that's my thoughts on it. You have any opinion on that, Deb?
I was not listening.
Okay. Somebody asked me on accessories my opinion on getting a Tormek with the diamonds for turning things. One of the key features about Tormeks and the stones they have is your ability to change the coarseness of that stone on the fly. They give you, on a hand turning world, it's like a neurostone or something like that, but it creates a slurry on top of it that makes the stone finer than it actually is. So you can use the same stone for coarse work and polishing work, depending on how you use it. If you switch from that abrasive stone, that friable stone, to a diamond stone, you lose that ability. So the only coarseness is whatever that coarseness of those diamonds are. You can't make it finer or worse. So I'm not sure that's the greatest option out there, because one of the cool things about those Tormeks and those slow speed grinders is the ability to change that grip pattern. I don't have a Tormek. Dad had a jet copy of it, but the gears ground up a little bit, and I need to take it apart and fix it to get that working again. But I've never used one of those slow speed grinders myself. They look like they'd be wonderful for hand tools, but I'm not sure they're the best for turning. Somebody asked me, is a smock a good thing? Yeah, I just worked in a very hot warehouse, and they make me feel stuffy. And the last thing we're going to comment on before I turn to y'all for the rest of the show is several people wanted to know more about chuck accessories. The things you buy in addition to the chucks, and that kind of goes along with lathe accessories. So what we have right here are variations of a chuck. One person was asking me, would I recommend getting the one-way, I guess this is a scroll style, they call it. They just call it the one-way chuck. One-way also makes a Talon chuck. Capacity-wise, size-wise, they work for about the same size materials, size blanks. It really comes down to, do you want to twist to tighten it up? Because this has a little key that locks in there, and you twist it to tighten it up, so your wrist is getting the power pressure. Or do you want to squeeze to tighten and loosen stuff? Which I had some bars set over here just for that. I don't know where I put them. I personally have used the squeeze style for so long that I am much faster just being able to drop two of these in here and squeeze it out. Now, if you need to get it really, really tight, a cheater with the squeeze ones is using your tool rest. Because with a tool rest, I can come over here, I can move my tool rest, oh, there they were. Right here, I can put them in like this, drop it down to that tool rest, and bang it. Or if I'm tightening it up, bang it this way, okay? So I feel that I can get a lot of pressure using this tool rest twist technique versus this way, I can only get it tightened up as the strength of my wrist. Oh, that's not very appropriate. That's really the difference between those two, in my opinion, is just how you tighten up the jaws. Do you have any other opinion on that, Dad?
Jaws, no.
Okay, the other thing you buy with chucks are jaws. And I have a whole video diving deep into this subject, so I'm just going to cover it really right quickly. They were recommending which jaws would you get. I pretty much used the number 3s all the time. Now you can get number 3s in two different styles. One of them is smooth on the inside, but it's actually dovetailed down. So it actually squeezes up here and you get a little dovetail recess. So the tenon you cut is a dovetail. The other style is serrated. So you see those little serrations right there? So this one, the tenon you cut straight, and these serrations kind of grip into that straight tenon, crushing fibers. The other variable is the edges. Notice that this one, they're kind of squared off right there. And this one, they're not ground off on those edges. Having them ground off a little bit allows me to grip square stuff. See how that grinding off on the edge allows a square blank to fit in here. But if you're gripping square stock, it's very dangerous because, well, it's not there's more risk in there because there is no slipping on this one. Whereas if the other kinds, if you had a round stock, if you really gripped it bad, it would kind of fly off or something like that. This is locked in. So you have to have a little bit more trust in your skill level with this setup. Other gouges, these were number 3s that I have in here. All of these were number 3s. These are number 4s. What's the difference? they're just wider. They hold a bigger tenon. And that's the advantage of stepping up in sizes in jaws, is because you can get wider and wider tenons inside the teeth, so you can grab heavier and heavier work safely. Then you have something what they call jumbo jaws, and these were only for finish work, for you would put your bowl in here and squeeze down on it, and then you could turn the bottom off. These are very, very light work. You do not do heavy work on this one, because what's holding it on are these dovetailed little cones. These rubber cones get squeezed around the edges of stuff. The other option is this toilet bowl plunger kind of thing. This is a kind of chuck that you can add to there. And basically you notice it has a hole right here, a hole right there, and then a gasket around the side. This is what's called a vacuum chuck. So you put a vacuum on this side, which let me show you on the lathe. So they have a little adapter that'll go into this side of most lathes, and what happens is it has a bearing, a free thing, and then you just put a hose on it. And sometimes you put your air compressor hose so it blows out, and blowing over that creates a vacuum, and sometimes you use a real vacuum. This is hollow, but it's continuously hollow all the way through your drive center, so you can put this on the threads, and it creates a vacuum right here. Really, really nice, fun thing to use if you have the option of adding a vacuum to your setup. But a lot of times when you buy these kind of things, the threads are different. So another accessory you can buy is an adapter. So this right here, if the threads on my lathe were different than the threads on whatever device I want to screw on, this changes it up. You can screw it on here and then screw it over here. I personally hate these because what they do is they magnify any vibration, because instead of turning at this distance away from the center, the vibration point, you are now turning this distance plus that distance. So the farther away from the headstock you get, vibrations get magnified. And we're only talking minute vibrations, but the more you get that, you can't get a good finish off your tool, and you're going to have to do a lot more sanding. Don't like vibrations in wood turning. Other things you can buy are these little accessories for your chucks, are things like this. And what they do is they grip. And these are kind of one-way centric, but other manufacturers have these. They kind of slip into that little slot right there. And then you grip it in these, and there's you a drive spur. And I will often use my drive center is the same setup in a stronghold. It's gripped inside the jaws, and there we go. Dad wanted me to point out that both he and I kind of recommend people stick with the name brand chucks. Well, we have two of the big guns, the Stronghold and the Vicmark. They're big size. I don't know what their name brand is. I don't use the Vicmark, but you can see the capacities of these Strongholds and the Vicmarks. They're just monster size right there. But the Vicmarks, they use kind of a hex key to open and close, and the one way uses a scrolling item. I don't know, which one of these do you think you have to clean out more often?
Which I have to do what?
Clean out the gears more often, because I will never. I will take my air gun, I'll blow these gears out, and it just turns a lot better on all of these things. They have gears inside them. You stick them inside and blow them out, and they just work a little bit better. But if he never cleans his out, I guess he never cleans his out. The other thing about a lot of jaws, I'm going to use these as an example, is a lot of them will have a little lip on the outside. That lip right there will allow you to put them inside a recess and expand out into them. A lot of people like turning stuff with a recess instead of clamping on a tenon. And here's another style of jaws. A spigot style just allows you to grip on longer stuff or a smaller hole and come out. Okay, that puts us at 50 minutes.
I have one chuck question.
Sure.
Boston Handyman asked about what's a good chuck to start with. I have quite a few chucks. Almost all of them are one ways. I've got total probably 5 one-way chucks and 3 Talon chucks, but I never bought a one-way chuck new. And the reason is that the one-way chuck is an older style. It's the one with the bars. The Talon chuck has the twist, and most people go with that one. And once they start using it, they really don't use their old one-way. So if you look at Craigslist, keep your eyes open for it for chuck. You'll find someone has an old one-way chuck that they're willing to sell for $100. And those things don't wear out. They're good for my great-grandson will use them, or granddaughter. So if I had to start out, I would buy a Talon or a one-way. And yes, they're $250, but
New.
They're a lifetime.
New, they're $250.
Yeah, new $250, but you can buy them used for $100. So keep your eyes open.
And I know this is bad of me. I do not recommend you buying the knockoff import ones, or the ones that have a lot of aluminum in them, or they're anodized to look fancy or something like that. They loosen up. The angles that you clamp down, these square things right there, if the internals of that chuck loosen up, all of a sudden those are splaying out, they're binding in, and they don't grip, the jaws won't be able to grip right if the chuck itself has some play to it. And every single, the Bear and the Dogs and the other kinds of brands that we have out there, they just seem to, over time, they don't seem to hold up. There's a reason why the pros, the people that are turning all day long, they pretty much are dedicated to Vic Mark and one way. And Vic Mark's New Zealand, one way is Canadian. Pick your country. Okay. And last chance. I'm looking for question marks. What's the purpose of having a grinder with high? What's the purpose of having a grinder with high speed on it? Other crafts might use higher speed grinders. Maybe welders and those kind of stuff use high speed grinders. I'm a woodworker and we prefer the lower speed stuff. I don't have a good answer for that. I'm sorry. That was from Jay Miller. What coring? Jay Miller also has, what coring system do you use? We have 2 videos out there. One of them I go into the one-way core saver system. The other one, Dad goes into the monotone system. Dad likes the monotone because it gives him artistic control. I like the one-way because it's efficient and it gets the job done. We have 2 long-form videos that dive deep in those 2 systems. The only thing that I had to say in addition to that one is one-way has come up with some carbide inserts that weren't available when I made the one-way coring one. I'm a convert. That's the only way I go. The bits on coring systems dull so fast, and half the time you're halfway in the bolt into it, and you go, oh, maybe I can just go a little bit farther just to finish that one set. The carbide one just works so much nicer, and you can sharpen it with diamond tools to resharpen it. But he also changed up the shaping of the cutter a tad bit with the carbide, and I think it's a little bit more efficient. You have any opinion on that coring system? Okay.
Got questions if you got ready.
Yes.
Taylor asked, I'm spindle turning, I'm doing rolling pins, and I have a problem getting consistent thickness across the pin.
Okay, you're not touching the tool rest. The tool rest is your thickness gauge. We talked about that a little bit in the last video I did, but I will be going over that a lot more as we get into more of the skill-based projects. But one of the biggest things I see on YouTube, especially with these blasted carbides, is people turning like this. Well, what's the depth, what's controlling this action right here? Purely your skill and your level of caffeine involvement. Because if you're shaking or anything like that, your depth changes. What's going to, is your depth gauge, is your hand touching the tool rest. And there is your depth gauge, because now you have control. Back here, it is just your coordination. Right here, you have an anchor point, and you can control it. So what could you do if you want to get a very consistent depth gauge? You know, you could put a little shim or something like there to guide your hand a little bit to make a slight arc. Or you could just kind of start here, and then as you come over, you can control how far you press in going over this way. But this is your anchor point. You have any other opinion on that? It's a tool rest.
Ross asked, how long should I let green wood dry? And I say that's either pre-turn, he didn't say, but I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm not.
Keep talking. Your mic is still going.
Okay, regarding how long should green wood dry? If you turn it, rough turn it, to 10% of it, 10% of your width, let that be the thickness. If it's even throughout, and you put it in a paper bag with some sawdust, then probably 3 or 4 or 5 months it will dry.
In Texas.
In Texas, you can put it in a homemade kiln with a light bulb, and it'll probably dry in 4 weeks. But in both cases, you need to put in sealer on them so that it slows down the end grain. If you're talking about thicker than that, an inch per year, if you go real thin, if you cut turn it one time and cut it down to a ½ inch or less, say 3/16 to a ¼ inch thick, it'll dry in a paper bag in a month, and to where you can sand it and go with it. But it'll warp. So
what he's talking about is rough turning versus just letting the blank dry. So if you have a log right here, it's 12 inches thick. Moisture leaves through the outside and through the end grain, but the closer to the air. Okay. So if you have it in a log form, that portion of the wood that's in the center of the tree, right along there, it's going to take a long time for this wood fibers up on the outside of the tree to dry out a little bit, draw a little bit moisture in from the next cell over, it dry out a little bit, it move it down, it move it down, it move it down. So it takes forever for the center to dry out. There's a general rule of thumb that it's a year for the first you dry something out. If you're air drying a board, like a 4/4, 8/4 board, it's 1 year plus a year per inch. So if you have a 1 inch board, it's going to take 2 years for it to reach equilibrium with the outside air. If you have a 2 inch board, it takes 3 years, because 1 year plus a year per inch. Now, the advantage of what he's talking about is taking that thing and turning you a bowl, but making that bowl fairly thick and very even all the way down. That way, as moisture leaves on the outside and inside of the bowl, the moisture down in the center, it doesn't have as far to travel to get out of the bowl. So it can dry quicker because you poured it out and you roughed out a bowl. Now this thing is going to warp, as you said, but you all of a sudden have all this material, so as you turn it, you can turn away all the warpage and end up with your nice thin bowl right there. So a lot of times when you're coring wood, green wood, you're coring it about 2 inches thick sections up there, so you have a 2-inch thick bowl that you go out and you stack in your shed for, in Texas, 3 to 6 months, and then you put it back on the lathe and you turn your finished product and it'll stay nice and round after that point. It's all the distance the wood has to travel. Okay, we're at an hour, so we're going to go ahead and slowly wrap it up. The next video in the Turning Basics series will not be this Thursday, but likely 2 Thursdays out, because the following Thursday is going to be a lathe stand so that I can start demonstrating on this particular lathe using proper techniques and not being hunched up like that. And then after that, it will be every Thursday until the series is done. I'll get ahead of my videos. My patrons will get an early look at all videos. So if I get all 12 done, they will be up on Patreon, but they will be released once a week for everybody else. And patrons always get the first questions answered, so I can be sure I make them, because that's a very inexpensive way for me to thank them for their support. Because I don't have a big team to do a bunch of other stuff for those guys and girls and gals and ladies, and I'm just digging a hole. So, we have any last minute questions? Okay. Well, thanks for coming out there. I hope you enjoyed this. Tell me give me some comments down in the comments when we post it up. All your chat questions disappear when it goes on the main page. And then I will archive this via a link on the Turning Basics #2 video. But tell me what you think and what we could do a little bit differently. If you're getting dizzy from me moving the camera around, let me know. If sharing earpieces, because these are microphones, I thought that if I gave Dad one and me one, maybe the sound would work out. So that's another question I'll have to answer myself when I listen back, but I'd like your opinion. So I guess I'll talk to you later. Y'all be safe, have fun, and remember, it's always worth the effort to learn, create, share with others.